Tigercast fans, we asked for some more transparency on Josh Smillie, and well, we got it. And whilst it wasn't the news that we were totally after, I do appreciate the club putting out a more transparent article about where Smillie was at. And funnily enough, it came about 48 hours after we did our injury report live show, where I sort of did plead with the club to do something a bit more transparent on him. And I know I wasn't the only one saying that, so I'm not at all trying to say that's why, but I think they definitely would have seen and heard the message from supporters that they wanting just to understand a bit more about what was happening in regards to Smillie, because it was a little bit mysterious and it felt like it was chopping and changing a little bit. So I'll read from the article and then we'll discuss what it all means and maybe what it looks like for 2026 and beyond. But it says, Richmond confirms that midfielder Josh Smillie will not be available for selection for the remainder of the AFL season following a new injury setback. I did actually catch wind of this quad injury a few days before it came out, but I wasn't quite sure, if it was going to be true, the severity of it or anything like that. So disappointing to hear that there was a new injury picked up. But it says Smillie had returned to the main group in the past fortnight and was pushing for a VFL return until he felt discomfort in his quad following a recent training session. They put him through for scans, and it's since revealed that there was a strain that will rule him out for at least the next 3 weeks. Which is really disappointing for him. He's obviously had an epically long stint of conditioning, and then to sort of get yourself to the point of return to some sort of football to then re-injure a new injury is really disappointing. I mean, somewhat of a silver lining is at least it wasn't a hamstring, because that's obviously what kept him out in the earlier parts of pre-season. So that's not a bad result if you had to sort of put some silver lining across what had happened. And the club still are going to be working towards a potential return to action through the VFL finals, given that the Richmond VFL team is qualified for the wild card and they're about to qualify, hopefully, at the end of this weekend for finals. Look, I know they say they're aiming for a potential return to action through to the VFL finals. I personally don't see it happening. I think the best course of action would be just to cotton wool him and get him right for pre-season day one in November, whenever that might be. I don't really see a purpose served trying to get him back for the VFL finals. I know he would be a great addition if he was up and running, but I just don't think the risk is worth doing. So the nature of Smillie's quad injury will enable him to continue running, which is really good. However, he will need to progress the volume and intensity of kicking at distance. Smillie had been undertaking a conditioning block over the last 8 weeks after overcoming a hamstring injury he suffered in May. The 196cm midfielder had previously also injured his hamstring in match sim in January, affecting his pre-season training load. And Tim Livingston obviously says the club will take no risks with Josh Smillie across the season, and it's a long-term plan, which I think supporters across the board deep down appreciate, understand, and most definitely acknowledge that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And not seeing Josh Smillie now in 2025, whilst frustrating, especially for him, right? He's put in all this work, seeing all of his mates play games as well, and he's sort of stuck on the sideline. So frustrating for no more than for Josh himself. But obviously we would have all loved to have seen him play a bit more football, happy and healthy, but it's not to be. But it's a long career. Like, we're talking 10, 15 years that we're looking at to get out of these types of players. So definitely I've got no issue in them sidelining him for the rest of the year to get him right. And I think the beauty of having the 8 draft picks is it probably doesn't feel as magnified. Some clubs only had 1 draftee. So imagine if you only had the 1 draftee to look forward to seeing and you didn't see him for the year, it would probably feel a bit more, a bit more difficult to take. But I can definitely respect and appreciate the slow approach to this. Interesting that they did list him as 196 centimeters. I thought that was very deliberate and good that they did that. I had heard, and I did post, that someone who had connections to the players had mentioned they thought he was closer to 197, 198. Obviously, they were a little bit off on their estimations, but he's definitely grown since being drafted. I think he was drafted at 195. So a 196 centimeter midfielder is still a big unit, right? It's still a midfielder of that size that we as a club have not really had or experienced before. So I think it's still important to realise and understand that there's probably a lot of learning going on for both Josh and how his body operates and how his body handles the workload demands of AFL and VFL football, as well as the club, because I can't remember anyone in recent memory of his size. And when I say size, I'm talking about height and weight/build, because I've had a few people try and mention Riley Collier-Dawkins as someone who was like a 191, 192 centimetre midfielder that we obviously had. So even though the height is somewhat closer, I mean, it's still 4 or 5 centimetres short of what Smillie is, but the more important part to that comparison is Collier-Dawkins was about 65, 70 kilos wringing wet when he arrived at the club and didn't put on much more after that, whereas Smillie is obviously very, very well built and very defined and muscular, so it's carrying a lot more weight in that regard, and that's what causes the stress through the bones and joints when you're talking about the running workloads of AFL and VFL football. So I still stand by that. I don't recall personally a player in our time who's been at his size, both height and weight, as a midfielder. And on that alone, I think it's just a bit of a learning curve for the club, for Josh. And now they have a chance to get to work on getting this right for pre-season, November 2025 to roll into 2026. And from all the people you hear about from the club, they are still super excited about what this kid has to offer. And I don't want this year to diminish what he's going to bring to the football club. I understand that it will bring some skepticism and some maybe people will doubt, will he reach heights and whatever, but it's 1 year. I mean, if you look at a different club, let's look at Carlton, for example. Jagger Smith obviously did his knee, sadly, and didn't even get to play any other games of football, but he's going to come back, bigger, better, stronger, and Smillie will be no different. All you have to do is go and watch his highlight tapes from the national champs, his draft combine, even the pre-season videos the club were posting. You can see what he's all about, and you can see that he's going to be a very, very good footballer. Once he gets the understanding and his body adjusts to what we're needing him to do, when it all clicks, it's going to be exciting. And have heard from people who do know some players that the players are equally as excited about what Josh Smillie brings to the football club. They've all said he's an ultra professional. So yeah, hopefully they can just work through this as player and club to get him back on track for pre-season. But yeah, overall, I think we're allowed to say we're disappointed for him. I don't want to say we're disappointed at the club or at him, because I don't think that's right. Sometimes shit happens, and this is a bit of a unicorn and unique case. So we obviously wish Josh Smillie all the best in his recovery. What will be interesting is what happens when our season officially ends, at both VFL and AFL level, and then what work he's able to do in that off-season time to get himself prepped for a big pre-season. But we look forward to him hitting the ground running in November. And the aim now is to have him play round 1 2026. And I know this is maybe a clutching at straws comment, but in a lot of ways, he's almost like a brand new recruit for next year, which is equally as exciting, because we obviously had the thrill of seeing 7 of them play this year. And now we get to see Josh Smillie hopefully play round 1 next year, which will add another exciting element to what will hopefully be an exciting 2026 for us. But so instead of leaving your thoughts in the comments below necessarily, because I don't want to have a mixed bag of comments of good and bad, I reckon we should leave Josh some messages of support in the comments below. Let's go down that path. Let's actually get behind the kid, wrap our arms around him as a supporter base, show him some love. So let's leave some comments of support for Josh, and we look forward to seeing him in 2026. So until the next one, go Tigers.